Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is a unit of the module Advanced Syntax. I am Jayashilan. I am a retired professor of the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. In this unit, we are going to talk about the government and binding theory. We looked at the GB theory in earlier units, but in this particular unit, we are going to speak about an important idea of GB theory, namely the projection principle. The projection principle. Okay? And we will proceed as follows. First, I will outline what the projection principle is. Then I'll show you what are the consequences of the projection principle for syntactic analysis. Then I will show you how the trace theory of movement is implied by the projection principle. Then we will go on to a very important development, namely how the projection principle enables us to eliminate phrase structure rules from the grammar. Finally, we will end by outlining the consequences of the projection principle for language acquisition. As we know, a verb has its arguments. For example, the verb kill has two arguments. John killed Bill. Okay, just two arguments. NP1 kill, NP2. The verb give has three arguments. John gave the book to Mary. Okay, or John gave Mary the book. Three arguments. A verb like say has two arguments. One, the subject is an NP, but the second argument is a clause. John said that Mary is nice. Okay? So the verb comes with its meaning, and its meaning determines the number of arguments the verb takes and also the category of those arguments. For example, kill takes as its complement an NP. John killed Bill. But the verb say takes as its complement a clause. John said that Mary is clever. Okay? So the structure of the VP is not arbitrary. It is determined by the meaning of the verb, because the meaning of the verb determines how many arguments it takes and what are the categories of those arguments. Now, what the projection principle does is to make this claim into a fundamental claim about grammar, namely that the structure of a VP, for example, is completely determined by the theta grid of the verb. By the theta grid, I mean the number of theta roles, arguments which the verb takes. For example, as I said, kill takes two arguments, give takes three arguments, and say takes two arguments, one of which is a clause. Now, the claim is that this completely gives us the structure of a verb phrase, or in other words, there is a simple and straightforward mapping from the semantics of a verb to the syntax, the structure of the verb phrase. This might not look to you to be a very revolutionary claim, But when we look at its consequences for grammar, you will realize that it has very far-reaching consequences. Let us look at the projection principle in greater detail. As I said, the central claim of the projection principle is that the structure of a phrase cannot be different from the theta grid of its head, and that as a consequence, there is a straightforward and simple mapping relation from the lexicon to the syntax. As we know, the lexicon gives us words, for example, verbs with their meanings, and the lexicon also tells us how many arguments the verb takes and what are the categories of those arguments. And the claim is that syntax is a projection from the lexicon. The projection principle is stated in Lectures on Government and Binding, the 1981 book. It is stated as three sub-statements. Three sub-statements. And these three sub-statements, when you first look at them, may appear to you to be rather pointless statements. But they are not pointless, they have very great consequences. The first sub-statement, which the projection principle consists of, says the head of a phrase, theta marks its sister constituents within the phrase. The head of a phrase, theta marks its sister constituents within the phrase. You take the VP, the head of VP is V, and this says that the verb theta marks its complements within the VP. Note that the verb theta marks every one of its complements. Every one of its complements. There cannot be such a thing as a non-theta marked complement. So the first statement is the head of a phrase, theta marks its complements. As a corollary, the verb theta marks all its complements. The second statement says, if the head of a phrase is specified in its lexical entry as taking an argument of a certain type, then this requirement is satisfied at some level of the syntax. That is, if the lexicon says that, for example, a verb takes an argument of a certain type, that has to be satisfied by the syntax. For example, if the lexical entry of the verb say tells you that it takes one argument as its complement, namely a clause. John said that Mary is clever. Okay? Say that Mary is clever. That's the clausal complement of say. If the lexicon tells you that about the verb say, that has to be, that lexical entry has to be satisfied by every syntactic level. That is, you cannot have a deep structure, destructure, which ignores an argument or which introduces another element which is not an argument that is specified in the verb's lexical entry. Therefore, we get that the structure of a VP is determined by the theta grid of the verb. The third substatement of the projection principle says that if the head of a phrase has an argument at any one of the syntactic levels, it has this argument at every other syntactic level too. Syntactic levels, it refers to a D structure, S structure, and LF. D structure, S structure, and LF. That is, what the statement says is that it is not enough for the lexical requirements of a verb to be satisfied at one level of the representation. For example, the deep structure, it must be satisfied at every level of representation. Let us look now at the consequences of these three statements for syntactic analysis. Take, for example, the verb believe. Believe can take has to take or can take a clausal complement. For example, I believe that he is clever. That he is clever is a clause which happens to be also a finite clause. The complement of believe, its clausal complement, can be a non-finite clause, as in I believe him to be clever. The question is, how do we analyze him to be clever, or the whole verb phrase believe him to be clever? A very popular analysis of this sentence at the time when Chomsky was writing LGB was to take him to be the direct object of belief, and followed by another complement to be clever. That is, believe in this case has two complements, him, which is a noun phrase, and to be clever, which is a kind of verb phrase. And the claim was that although him was generated as the direct object of belief, it did not get interpreted there. It was interpreted as the subject of to be clever. But Chomsky rejects this analysis and he says belief takes only one clausal complement, and that clausal complement is him to be clever. And it is simply that him is case marked by belief across a clausal boundary, but otherwise the whole thing is a clause. Therefore, the subcategorization of the verb believe remains the same. In I believe that he is clever, believe takes a clausal complement, and I believe him to be clever. Him to be clever is also a clause, therefore it takes a single clausal complement. Now, the question was, how do we decide between the traditionally accepted analysis before GB, in which in I believe him to be clever, him was generated as the direct object of belief, but was interpreted as the subject of to be clever, and the Chomskyan analysis, which takes him to be clever as a clause. The traditional analysis is disallowed by the projection principle, because the projection principle says that the syntax has to be a projection of the lexical entries theta and grid. So in the earlier analysis, traditional analysis, belief took a complement, namely him, as direct object, which did not theta mark. But you will recall that the first statement of the projection principle said that the head of a phrase, in this case a verb, must theta mark all its complements. Therefore, the traditional analysis violates the projection principle, and therefore it has to be rejected. This is the sense in which the projection principle gives us guidance about syntactic analysis. Now we come to a second consequence of the projection principle, namely that the trace theory follows from the projection principle. You remember the third statement of the projection principle said that if an argument is represented in the VP at a certain level, say the deep structure, it has to be represented at every other level too. Therefore, the traditional type of, for example, the passive, in which the direct object moves from its deep structure position to the subject, leaving an empty position behind, is not anymore tenable. Because in the deep structure, say, John loves Mary, Mary is loved. In the deep structure, love takes an NP complement. When the NP moves out to the subject position, if it leaves an empty position, then the structure of the VP changes, because now the verb has no direct object position represented there. This is disallowed by the projection principle, and therefore we get the consequence that when a phrase moves, that position is not empty. There's a trace of the moved phrase in its original position. In GB, the trace was considered to be just an empty position with a category label. In minimalism, Chomsky will claim that the trace is actually a copy of the moved phrase. So you can see that the trace theory is a consequence of the projection principle. A third very important consequence of the projection principle is that it enables us to eliminate phrase structure rules from the grammar. The projection principle says that the structure of a VP is completely determined by the meaning of the verb. And the varieties of VPs we get, for example, kill takes a NP as its complement, John killed Bill. Say takes a clause as its complement, John said that Mary is clever. Okay? And give takes two complements, John gave the book to Mary. This is completely determined by the meaning of the verb. And therefore, we do not need an independent module of grammar which tells you what the structure of the verb phrase is. That is, we don't need phrase structure rules anymore. Phrase structure rules can be eliminated from grammar. In the first module on the government and binding theory, we saw that GB eliminated rules of grammar. Now we see that GB eliminates phrase structure rules also. So we are moving towards a very spare, very simple grammar. Now, lastly, let me talk about what are the consequences of the projection principle for language acquisition. As we said, in a theory which does not have the projection principle, the syntax and the semantics can differ widely. But the projection principle ties the syntax closely to the semantics. If the verb's semantics requires a certain type of complement, it has to be represented in the syntax. And therefore, what does it mean for language acquisition? If the syntax could widely differ from its semantics. For example, if I believe him to be clever, in that believe takes two complements, him as a direct object, to be clever as another complement, which is at variance with the meaning of the verb believe. According to the meaning of the verb believe, believe should take a clausal complement. If the two could differ wildly in an unpredictable way, then the child has to learn syntax separately. But if the syntax of a verb phrase simply is a projection of the meaning of the verb, then the structure of the verb phrase comes free for the child once it learns the meaning of the verb. So the task of language acquisition becomes extremely simple. All that the child has to learn is the meanings of words, in particular the meanings of verbs, the structure of phrases. For example, the structure of VP comes free. Therefore, this explains why language acquisition is easy and quick. In this unit, we looked at a very important idea of GB theory, namely the projection principle. The projection principle essentially says syntax is a projection from the meaning of lexical items. Therefore, there is a complete correspondence between syntax and semantics. And we showed its consequences for syntax, how it determines certain syntactic analyses, how it enables us to eliminate phrase structure rules, and lastly we saw how it explains why language acquisition by a child is so easy and rapid. Thank you.